On July 13th in 1787, Congress enacts the Northwest Ordinance, structuring settlement of the Northwest Territory and creating a policy for the addition of new states to our nation. The members of Congress knew that if their new confederation were to survive intact, it had to resolve the states' competing claims to Western territory. In 1781, Virginia began by ceding its extensive land claims to Congress, a move that made other states more comfortable in doing the same. In 1784, Thomas Jefferson first proposed a method of incorporating these Western territories into the United States. His plan effectively turned the territories into colonies of the existing states. 10 new Northwestern territories would select the constitution of an existing state and then wait until its population reached 20,000 to join the Confederation as a full member. Congress, however, feared that the new states, 10 in the Northwest, as well as Kentucky, Tennessee, and Vermont, would quickly gain enough power to outvote the old ones and never pass the measure. 3 years later, the Northwest Ordinance proposed that 3 to 5 new states be created from the Northwest Territory. Instead of adopting the legal constructs of an existing state, each territory would have an appointed governor and council. When the population reached 5,000, the residents could elect their own assembly, although the governor would retain absolute veto power. When 60,000 settlers resided in a territory, they could draft a constitution and petition for full statehood. The ordinance provided for civil liberties and public education within the new territories, but did not allow slavery. Pro-slavery Southerners were willing to go along with this because they hoped that the new states would be populated by white settlers from the South. They believed that although these Southerners would have no enslaved workers of their own, they would not join the growing abolition movement of the North. On July 13th in 1930, France defeats Mexico 4-1, and the U.S. defeats Belgium 3-0 in the first ever World Cup football match. These matches were played simultaneously in host cities Montevideo and Uruguay. The World Cup has since become the world's most watched sporting event. After football, soccer to Americans, was dropped from the program for the 1932 Olympics in Los Angeles, FIFA President Jules Rimet helped to organize an international tournament in 1930. Much to the dismay of European footballers, Uruguay, winner of the back-to-back gold medals at the 1924 Paris Olympics and 1928 Amsterdam Olympics, was chosen to host the inaugural World Cup. Due to depression in Europe, many European players, afraid their day jobs would not exist when they returned, were either unable or unwilling to attend the tournament. As a result, some of the most accomplished European teams, including 3-time Olympic gold medalists England and football enthusiasts Italy, Spain, Germany, and Holland, did not make an appearance at the first World Cup. However, when Uruguay agreed to help pay traveling expenses, Rimet was able to convince Belgium, France, Romania, and Yugoslavia to make the trip. In Romania, King Carol selected the team members himself, gave them a 3-month vacation from their jobs, and guaranteed the players would be employed when they returned. Going into the tournament, Uruguay and Argentina were the overwhelming favorites, while France and the United States also fielded competitive sides. In the first round, France's Lucien Laurent scored the first ever World Cup goal. In its second game, France lost to Argentina 1-0 amid controversy over the referees ending the game 6 minutes early. Once the problem was discovered, the referee had to bring the Argentine players back onto the field to play the final minutes. After beating Belgium, the U.S. beat Paraguay to set up a semifinal match with Argentina, which they lost 6-1. In the first World Cup final, held on July 30th, 1930, 93,000 spectators looked on as Uruguay defeated Argentina 4-2 in a rematch of the 1928 Olympic gold medal game. Uruguay went on to win its second World Cup in 1950 with a 2-1 win over Brazil in Rio de Janeiro. On July 10th in 2015, Texas State Trooper Brian Encinia pulls over 28-year-old Sandra Bland for failing to signal a lane change. After a heated encounter, he arrests her and takes her to a nearby jail. 3 days later, on the morning of July 13th, her body is found in her cell. Her spirit has continued on to the eternity. Bland's case drew international outrage over the treatment of black people by white police officers and became a painful case cited in the Black Lives Matter movement. Encinia's dash cam and Bland's phone both recorded partial videos of the incident. Bland refused Encinia's orders to put out her cigarette and get out of her car, at which point he brandished his taser and told her, quote, "I will light you up," unquote. Encinia later claimed that Bland kicked him, prompting him to wrestle her to the ground. The alleged fight was not captured on video, save for Bland describing being knocked to the ground and telling Encinia she has epilepsy. Several days later, an officer sent to deliver Bland her breakfast found her lifeless body. And an autopsy concluded she had hung herself with a plastic bag. Bland's family and friends immediately questioned not only her treatment, but also the official report of her supposed suicide. Bland was reportedly in good spirits around the time of her arrest. Excited by the prospect of a new job, she was due to start in just a few days. Sandra Bland's continuance into the eternity, almost exactly a year after Eric Garner's continuance into the eternity at the hands of New York Police Department, fit into a pattern of police violence and systemic racism in law enforcement that became increasingly visible to the American public over the course of the years. The jail where the Sandra Bland incident took place was found to have been ignoring protocols regarding prisoner observation, and in 2017, Texas passed the Sandra Bland Act, which attempts to educate police officers about mental illness and de-escalation and mandates that jails divert people with mental health or substance abuse issues into treatment. Bland's name became known across the country shortly after her continuance and was chanted at racial justice protests for years. On July 13th in 2013, the most awesome and amazing Alicia Garza posted a message on Facebook containing the phrase Black Lives Matter, which soon becomes a rallying cry and a movement throughout our country and around the world. Alicia Garza said she felt, quote, a deep sense of grief, unquote, after the acquittal of George Zimmerman for the second-degree murder of Trayvon Martin. She was further saddened to note that many people appear to blame the victim, Trayvon Martin, and not the disease, racism. Patrice Cullors, a Los Angeles community organizer and friend of Alicia Garza, read her post and replied with the first instance of hashtag Black Lives Matter. As the hashtag became popular on Facebook and Twitter, Garza, Cullors, and fellow activist Opal Tometi built a network of community organizers and racial justice activists using the name Black Lives Matter. The phrase and the hashtag were then quickly adopted by grassroots activists and protests all across the country, particularly after the subsequent killings of Michael Brown, Eric Garner, and a number of other Black Americans at the hands of police officers or would-be vigilantes like Zimmerman. Simple and clear in its demand for Black dignity, the phrase became one of the major symbols of protest that erupted after Michael Brown's continuance into eternity in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014. While polling showed that a majority of Americans disapproved of the Black Lives Matter movement when it first began, in the years following, support for its central arguments grew. George Floyd continued his eternity in May of 2020. After this incident occurred in Minneapolis, Minnesota, it unleashed a nationwide protest movement against police brutality and racism. Support for Black Lives Matter movement increased by a 28-point margin in 2 weeks, almost as much as it had in the preceding 2 years, according to the New York Times. Perhaps more than any other phrase since Black Power, Black Lives Matter became a singular rallying cry for the American and global racial justice movements. All historic information documented on this audio file can be verified on history.com.